She stepped into the grand and refined music hall, her head bowed, blending into the background like just another unnoticed worker in a uniform dulled by years of wear. To most, she was invisible, acknowledged only when someone needed a convenient target for their amusement, a person to belittle and remind of their place. But when they shoved her toward the grand piano, mocking laughter filling the air as they demanded she play, expecting nothing more than a clumsy, embarrassing display, what happened next left the entire room breathless. By the time her fingers lifted from the keys, the woman they had dismissed had transformed before their eyes. No longer a faceless worker, no longer an afterthought, Emily Johnson became the name they would never forget. Emily moved with quiet efficiency through the grand corridors of the Preston Music Conservatory, her sneakers producing faint, insignificant squeaks against the polished marble floor. The sound barely registered amidst the cascading notes of Chopin drifting from distant practice rooms. At 28, she wore the beige uniform of the custodial staff with an air of quiet resilience. Her dark hair, neatly pulled back into a simple ponytail, framed a face that bore traces of dreams once vivid, now faded into the background like the dust she wiped away daily. 3 years had passed since she first took this job, and in that time, she had perfected the art of invisibility. Students passed her without a second glance. Faculty members looked past her, their gazes slipping over her uniform as though she were just another fixture in the building, something to be maintained but never truly seen. As she moved through the main hall, her fingers instinctively reached out to straighten a slightly tilted portrait of a stern-faced composer, ensuring it was perfectly aligned before continuing her routine. Her hands, roughened by cleaning chemicals and hours of scrubbing, still held an effortless grace, though few had ever noticed. "Emily, can you cover the reception area today? The foundation board is coming in." The request came from her supervisor, Mr. Collins, who barely glanced up from his clipboard as he made the assignment. "Yes, Mr. Collins," she answered softly, her voice barely carrying over the grand space. As she approached the grand reception hall, its towering ceilings and sweeping windows casting an ethereal glow across the floor, her eyes caught on something in the far corner. The magnificent Steinway piano, a silent, commanding presence. The centerpiece of every recital, every fundraiser. For the briefest moment, something flickered across her face. A whisper of longing. A reflection in the polished brass of a nearby lamp revealed more than just her uniform. It showed the ghost of a girl who once sat at a similar piano, her entire future stretching before her like an unwritten symphony. But life had played a different tune. She shook her head slightly, pushing the thought away. The past was the past. This was her reality now. And she had made her peace with it, or so she told herself, morning after morning. Victoria Parker's entrance was as commanding as ever. At 53, she was the living embodiment of refinement and discipline, her every movement exuding authority. The rhythmic clicks of her heels against marble announced her presence before she even spoke. "Those chairs need to be precisely 1 inch apart." "This arrangement is a mess," she instructed, not sparing a glance in Emily's direction. "Yes, Mrs. Parker," Emily responded immediately, moving to correct the placements. Across the room, Samantha Reed, the conservatory's most prestigious piano instructor, watched with thinly veiled amusement. She thrived in an environment of control where excellence was expected and anything less was dismissed outright. "Victoria," Samantha called out, her voice carrying effortlessly, "do remind the staff to use the service corridors when the guests arrive. Last time, I noticed some of them in plain sight during the Chopin competition." The words were aimed like an arrow, striking with quiet precision. Emily felt the familiar sting of humiliation but kept her head down, her hands steady as she adjusted the last chair. She was used to this. The condescension. The dismissiveness. It was just another day. Later, as she polished the brass railing along the grand staircase, the distant sound of a struggling piano student caught her ear. A young girl, perhaps 12, repeated the same passage over and over, frustration evident in every mistake. Without thinking, Emily whispered, "Try loosening your wrist on the arpeggios." The girl turned, startled. Before she could respond, Samantha's icy voice cut through the air. Did you just attempt to instruct my student? Emily froze. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to what? Samantha's laugh was sharp, cutting. To assume your expertise in mopping floors extended to piano technique? The sting of the words burned, but Emily said nothing. She simply lowered her gaze and returned to her work. What Samantha couldn't see, what no one saw, were Emily's fingers, subtly moving against the railing, tracing the notes, correcting, perfecting, completing the passage in a silent performance that no one would ever hear. But that was about to change. The night of the gala arrived. The conservatory gleamed under Emily's careful attention, every surface spotless, every chair perfectly aligned. Tonight, the wealthiest patrons would gather, their donations shaping the fate of the institution's programs. She was just finishing her final tasks when Samantha stormed into the room, her phone pressed to her ear. What do you mean you're in the hospital? Her voice was sharp with panic. The gala starts in an hour, Olivia. You can't. She paused, listening, then sighed. Food poisoning? Today of all days. The words sent a ripple of tension through the room. Within seconds, Victoria was at her side. What happened? Olivia can't perform, Samantha muttered through gritted teeth. Victoria's expression darkened. But she's our main event. The Jefferson Foundation specifically requested Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody. I know that, Samantha snapped, voice lowering. But none of my other students are prepared for it. Jason Miller, a young teaching assistant who was one of the few to ever acknowledge Emily's presence, stepped forward hesitantly. There is someone else who can play it. Victoria's head snapped toward him. Who? Jason hesitated, then looked toward Emily. Her. Silence. Samantha was the first to break it, laughter bursting from her lips. You can't be serious. The janitor? Jason stood firm. I've heard her play when she thought the building was empty. She's remarkable. All eyes turned to Emily. Victoria's gaze was sharp. Is this true? You play. Emily swallowed, fingers tightening around her cleaning cloth. Yes, ma'am. And you think you can play Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody for our donors? Samantha's tone dripped with disbelief. Emily held her gaze, unflinching for the first time in years. Yes, ma'am. I can. Victoria studied her carefully, weighing the risks. Then, a calculating smile formed. Well then, she said smoothly, you'll play tonight. The words were an opportunity, a challenge, a test. And Emily would not fail.